Hi, Founder fans. Jason here, and today's founder is John Adam Treutlen, an indentured servant who goes on to become governor of Georgia, the first governor of Georgia after the revolution. But let's talk about him a little bit. So he was just 10 years old when he comes over to North America with his parents. And when they get here, they arrive in Georgia, a very young Georgia, just really within the first 10 years of Georgia's founding. So he is almost one of the founding fathers of Georgia, except he was a son, just a boy. But he and his parents were all indentured servants, which, as a reminder, meant that they were expected to work for a period of time to pay off the cost of their voyage across the ocean. And this was especially important in early Georgia because it was so sparsely populated. They were desperate to get people to come work there. So Treutlen comes over with his family. Now, he is quickly noticed by some of the most high-ranking people in young Georgia as a very intelligent young man, and he is given a better education than most people in Georgia were expected to receive. And as such, Treutlen becomes a pretty successful adult. By his mid-30s, he's already become a successful businessman. He opens a mercantile business, and additionally, he buys himself a plantation. At this point, slaves were only just being introduced to Georgia, so he did end up purchasing some slaves, though notably, Georgia was originally founded against slavery, though that's a little bit off the point. As for Treutlen, he, as I said, makes a name for himself. He becomes very radical very quickly. Georgia is notably slow to radicalize, and even when independence is declared, there is still a very conservative faction in Georgia that does not like what the radicals are saying. Now, Treutlen works with Button Gwinnett, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and George Wells to create the new radical government. And those three men, Treutlen included, end up writing Georgia's first constitution. Shortly after they have an election, and who do they choose as the first governor of Georgia? John Adam Treutlen, an indentured servant who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and eventually became the first governor of Georgia. Now, it's not the beginning of his career that's interesting. Sadly, it's the tragic end of his life that is fascinating about John Adam Treutlen. You see, Treutlen, after being elected out as governor in only 1777, kind of retires from public life for 5 years. He goes back to his community. A pastor had just passed away that was a leader of his small town, Ebenezer, and he goes back to take over as kind of the spiritual leader until a new pastor can be found. Now, Treutlen does this, and at the end of 1781, does again assert himself back into state politics. And after he asserts himself into state politics, he's elected to the General Assembly. He does go for one term, and then he returns home. Now, this is where his story begins to conflict a little bit. And surprisingly, first of all, the founding parents of the United States left us a whole lot of documents to read. And additionally, he was a governor of Georgia, so you'd think his life would be very well documented, but there is a bit of question as to exactly what happened at the end of his life. Now, there is definitely the essence of mob violence. He was definitely killed by a mob. There is a bit of question where. Some people say South Carolina, but more than likely Georgia. And then there is a little bit of question of exactly how the story went down. But I will tell you the generally accepted story. Though, as I said, what I'm about to say, there are some question marks on, so please take it with a grain of salt. But as the story goes, John Adam Treutlen was in his house with his family at night when 5 men with torches arrived on his property and demanded he come out. He said, "No, thank you," and they lit his house on fire. And therefore, John and his wife and children had to get out of the house. And when they did, the men grabbed him and attacked him and killed him in front of his own family. Again, there is a little bit of question to this story, but this has been the story that's been accepted for 200 plus years now. And it's in 1782. It's only just after the victory at Yorktown. Now, the question becomes who and why. Again, sadly, we'll never know who. And we can't really tell why, but there are some options as to what might have been happening here. Now, as I said, there had always been within even the revolutionaries in Georgia a whole lot of tension, and there's a good chance that it was some of his political enemies, and maybe not political opponents for governor, but people in the other party from within Georgia politics who were just so unhappy that he was returning to office that they wanted him out of the way. There's also a widely held belief that these were loyalists, and again, March of 1782 is when he's killed, which is about 6 months after Yorktown, but about a year and a half before the official peace treaty arrives, and there was still sporadic violence during this time. He may have been killed by loyalists, because Georgia was a heavily loyalist state. Loyalists who were really upset that he had radicalized Georgia in the fashion he did. It could also be noted that it might have been personal. He might have upset someone we don't know about, who is not the type of person you want to upset. And notably, we talked about yesterday William Henry Drayton and his attempt to annex Georgia as part of South Carolina. Treutlen was the governor who put out a warrant for Drayton's arrest because he did not want South Carolina to annex Georgia. And there might have been some South Carolinians or even some Georgians who did want to be annexed by South Carolina who killed him. Fortunately, these are all just options we have to consider. Usually with these videos, I like to give you the facts and don't like to leave them open-ended like this, but hey, why don't you make up your own mind? Why don't you let me know in the comments? What do you know about John Adam Treutlen? What do you think about his murder? Who could have possibly done it on the options I listed? Thank you so much for watching. I put out a video every single day about a different American founder, so if you're new here, hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.